And at 1 o'clock in the morning, a guy by the name of Kent Hovind came on the radio. He was the ex-high school science teacher, talking on the topic of creation, evolution, and dinosaurs. And I listened to this guy, and in about 15 minutes, he had blown everything about evolution out of the water, and I was totally blown away. Every word he said to me just was speaking volumes, and I thought, man, this has got to be about the smartest guy in the world. And in about 15 minutes, he had shown scientifically how evolution is so laughable, so ridiculous, and absolutely impossible. And I'm just sitting there thinking, how in the world did I buy into this then, going through the school? And, you know, and of course that's why and how I did, going to school every year and being taught it every year. But he had blown me away so much with this whole topic, and see, he taught that he believed that dinosaurs, that man had lived with dinosaurs, and he still believed that there might even still be dinosaurs alive now, and things like that really fascinated me quite a bit. And so I listened for the full 3-hour interview, actually, that Art Bell did that night. It started at 1, it ended at 4, and I was just fascinated with every word this guy had to say. And then they told me about a seminar series that he had put together on the topic of creation, evolution, and dinosaurs. And of course, I was right on the phone as soon as the show was over to order the seminar series, because I thought, you know, this guy is too smart. There is too much here. And he definitely believed the Bible, and I thought I definitely believed the Bible too, growing up as a Mormon, thinking, you know, we believe all of these, you know, different books. So I order the seminar series, and as soon as it gets there, I of course put it in my TV and sit down and start watching it. The very first video I put in, he of course comes right out and says, you know, I'm not going to try and take anyone off guard or anything. I believe the Bible. I believe it from cover to cover. And, you know, went on to, started talking about the creation story in the Garden of Eden and things like that. And he talked about how the serpent had approached Eve and told her, you know, don't worry about eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You're not going to die. God just knows that when you take of it, you're going to become like him, knowing good from evil. You'll become a god, as you know. And he threw out a side comment, you know what the Mormons teach. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. Because here I am listening to this guy thinking that, you know, me and him are just on the same page. And he throws out this side comment, you know what the Mormons teach. We're going to become gods one day, populating our own planets and things like that. And I'm like, whoa, doesn't the Bible teach we can one day become a god? Because I grew up, we believe the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Pearl of Great Price, and the Doctrine and Covenants, you know. And so I thought, surely the Bible definitely has got to teach we can become gods. I don't know how it happened exactly, God knows, because God was getting a big-time foothold in my life, but I ended up coming across a video called Witnessing to Mormons. And I watched this video, and it blew me away again. Because in this video, it had Walter Martin and a couple different people who were talking about the problems and the flaws in Mormonism and how it very much biblically was way off base. And one of the key things that they were addressing was the fact that the Bible very clearly teaches that there's only one God. And I remember hearing the verses like Isaiah 43:10, which says, Ye are my witnesses, saith the Lord, and my servant whom I have chosen, that ye may know and believe me, and understand that I am he. Before me there was no God formed, neither shall there be after me. And I'm like, whoa, that's a pretty clear teaching that there's only one God. And then they went on to verses like Isaiah 44, verses 6 through 8, that, you know, and that passage says something like, "Fear ye not, neither be afraid. Have I not told you from that time, and have declared it? Ye are even my witnesses. Is there a God beside me? Yea, there is no God. I know not any." So here's God saying that he doesn't know of any other God besides himself. And of course, Mormonism teaches that God can't lie. The Bible clearly teaches that God can't lie. And here's God in the Bible saying that he doesn't know of any other God besides himself. And I'm thinking, well, that's pretty weird. And I think they also covered Jeremiah 10 and 11, which also is another very monotheistic verse that basically teaches that all the gods that did not create the heavens and the earth, they're going to perish from the earth and from the heavens. And it teaches, that there's only one God. Any other so-called God is going to die, But I still clinged to Mormonism, even at that point, I think, fairly strongly. Although I think God was getting a pretty strong hold in my life, and I don't really know at what point I got saved. I've got a few different thoughts on the topic, but God definitely was starting to get a hold of me. Also, just to mention this, at the end of each of the creation, evolution, dinosaur videos that I watched, there was always an invitation, which I found kind of fascinating because I had never really heard anything like that growing up as a Mormon. He'd always invite people to pray the sinner's prayer with them and ask Jesus into their heart, and I always kind of did pray along with them a little bit, but I don't know how serious I was the first few times necessarily, or things like that. But God was starting to get a hold of me. Later on in my life, I ran across a book called Letters to a Mormon Elder, written by James White. And this was definitely a book that God used to really shatter my faith in Mormonism. And it's also a book that God used in a huge way to introduce me to who he was. The very first chapter in this book, and I very highly recommend this book to any Mormon especially. One word of caution, James White is a brilliant man, but I do believe that he's a little extreme Calvinistic. I believe that God is very much sovereign, but at the same time I do believe that man has free will and free choices. The Bible's very clear about that. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. But anyway, James White is a brilliant man, wrote this book. It's a great book. The very first chapter in the book was called, "But It Is Translated Correctly." And see, Mormonism teaches that we believe the Bible as far as it is translated correctly. And as a Mormon, I had no idea that we didn't even believe what we were saying there. Because Mormons don't believe the Bible as far as it's translated correctly. They believe that the Bible is corrupted. If they believed it as far as it is translated correctly, they could just go retranslate from the manuscripts and have a Bible that they could agree with 100%. But James White went through and he gave a very clear, very good argument for why the Bible can be trusted as accurate and why it hasn't been corrupted over time. And James White can read Hebrew and Greek, and he's even taught classes on that and things like that too, which give him all the more credibility for the things that he's saying. And he just builds a very solid case for why the Bible could be trusted in that chapter. And to me, I started to realize, why have I discounted and just set aside the Bible for so long in my life and haven't really given it any credibility? And of course, it's the whole Mormon teaching. The Bible can only be trusted. It's been corrupted, The same teaching that Satan very first started in the Bible too. You read Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. You read Genesis 3:1, and there's Satan questioning the Word of God. And that's what he always does. He questions it and denies it and refutes it and, challenges it. So the Word of God has been being challenged from the beginning, but it stands strong even to this day. So reading that chapter, I gained a firm reason to believe the Bible and to believe that it could be trusted. Continuing to read in the book, there was another chapter called Meet the Awesome God of the Bible. And this is at one point in my life where this might have been the point where God did the official rebirth in my life. I don't know. This is one point where it could have been. But like I say, I don't have a definite date where I know I got saved. I just know God got a hold of my life and pulled me out of Mormonism and has totally revolutionized my life. But in this chapter, I met the awesome God of the Bible. James White goes through and he shows the verses in the Bible that teach that God is absolutely all-knowing, that there is nothing that God does not know, and that blew me away. Because basically what he says in the book, from what I can remember, it's like if there's an atom moving anywhere out in space, God knows exactly where it's moving. He knows every single thing about it. There isn't a thing that happens anywhere at any time that God doesn't fully know. And I just thought, whoa, this makes all the sense in the world, kind of, to what I know in my heart kind of has to be true. But I've never fathomed a God that big, at that point in my life. And he goes on to talk about the omnipotence of God being all-powerful, in absolute control of all things, that there's nothing that has any power that does not get its power from God. And that kind of blew me away too. That God was giving the power that everything had, whether it be to the sun or to light up the world, or whether it be to a man to simply walk on the earth or anything else. God's giving all power that exists to everything that does exist. And then his omnipresence, that blew me away also, but it made all the sense in the world. Why would a person ever pray if God was not omnipresent, Because the Bible literally teaches that God is all places, at all times, at the same time, simultaneously. And he's not just partially present here and partially present, he's fully present. As though you had a person sitting right with you in your room where you're at, and someone else had that very same person in another room right where they were at, and you do that all across the world and all through the universe. And that to me blew me away. But that's the only type of God that you really can have, if you're really going to think of a God who's going to hear and be able to do anything about a prayer. So that really blew me away too. And I really kind of got to meet the awesome God of the Bible.